Hey everybody, welcome back to these behavior revolution scriptures that we've been working on for a few years now. We're in 1 Kings and we're going into chapter 5, 6 and 7 today. We're going to do 3 chapters. It's all about Solomon's temple. He's finally got the reign has been established under him, and it's time to actually kick into motion what is the main thing he's meant to do. And we're going to breeze through some of these parts because we've just done a whole, how many studies did we do on David's tent, Solomon's temple? We've just gone right in depth to the subject. So let's just go through the scripture and see what unlocks for us. Here we go. Solomon's temple. From this point forward, now that Israel enjoyed prosperity, wealth, and power, never attained before or since, the most important work of Solomon's reign was ready to be addressed. This was the building of a house for the name of Yahuah. And surprisingly, the Gentile nations play a willing and pivotal role in the building of the temple. And the most prominent name amongst those Gentiles is King Hiram. So already we can see the Gentiles are involved with working on the temple, and we can see that this was to be a house for the name, a place where Yahuah could rest his name. And of course his name was him, who he is, his identity, his presence. You can't separate him from his name. And that's why when eventually in our next video we'll see how this was established and how the power came into the temple on the day that Solomon opened it all up and the priests were doing their duties, and then the power came in. Temple, 1 Kings 5 to 7. Hiram was the king of Tyre and had always been David's friend. So when Hiram heard that Solomon had become the new king, he sent his servants to Solomon, who sent them back with this message. You remember that my father, King David, had to fight many wars all around him and was never able to build a temple for the name of Yahuah his Elohim. King David was waiting until Yahuah allowed him to defeat all his enemies. But now Yahuah has given me peace along all the borders of my country. I have no enemies, and my people are in no danger. Yahuah made a promise to my father David, saying, I will make your son king after you, and he will build a temple for my name. So now I plan to build that temple for Yahuah my Elohim, and so I ask you to help me. Send your men to Lebanon to cut down cedar trees for me. My servants will work with yours. I will pay you any price that you decide as your servants' wages. But I need your help. Our carpenters are not as good as the carpenters of Sidon. Now, just referring to when Solomon says he's got no enemies, all my borders are protected. This is where he is. This is Solomon's empire here. The biggest and most protected and safe it's ever been. The territory that forms Solomon's Israel is generally the land to the west of the Euphrates. We're going to be talking about Euphrates this week in Revelation. Euphrates, it's drying up. It's actually drying up. People are saying it's drying up as prophesied. This is the Euphrates River. And as we know, Eden was around here somewhere because of the placement of the rivers. So Solomon's land is generally west of the Euphrates, not towards the east. And it's speaking of land in relation to the promised land. So Solomon's Israel generally controlled the land along both sides of the Jordan River. Here's the Jordan River. So he's controlling both sides, this side and this side. Both sides of the Jordan River and what is modern day Syria, Jordan and Israel, including the so-called West Bank. What Solomon's Israel did not control was Lebanon and Phoenicia. That's up here, all along here. They did not control Lebanon, Phoenicia, but they had excellent diplomatic ties with those countries. And they did not control Philistine territory, what we might think of as Gaza, and then a few miles north, that's down here. That little faint strip there on the coast. It did not control that area there. Although there was peace. Yisrael's border with Egypt is almost identical to their border with Egypt today that ends at the Sinai. This is the Sinai desert, of course. Most people think Mount Sinai was in here and that Moses crossed a little pond here to get to Sinai. No. This is all Egyptian territory. Why would Moses come out of Egypt to a Mount Sinai that's still in Egyptian territory? No. Moses went all the way down here. All the way down here to the narrowest point. See that narrowest point there? And they crossed over into Midian. Because he went back to the mountain that he first met Yahuah on in the burning bush. To his father-in-law. So, over here. Anyway, we're getting off track. This is all the nation that Solomon had. The territory of Israel before became king, area inherited by Solomon, area under strong economic influence of Solomon. All this area here. Anyway, Hiram was very happy when he heard what Solomon asked. And he said, I praise Yahuah today. We'll jump to that. He says, I praise Yahuah today. See there? The fact that Hiram praised Yahuah's name no way meant that he worshipped the Elohim of Israel. He simply respected their choice to worship him. Just to get that straight. So he says, I praise Yahuah today for giving David a wise son to rule this great nation. Then Hiram sent this message to Solomon. I heard what you asked for, and I'll give you all the cedar trees and fir trees you want. My servants will bring them down from Lebanon to the sea. Then I'll tie them together and float them down the shore to the place you choose. The logs will then be separated, and you can take them from there. And as payment for this, you will give food to all those who live in my palace. So if his palace is anything like Solomon's palace, that's quite a payment. You saw a couple of chapters ago how much Solomon's whole household needed to survive. So Hiram gave Solomon all the cedar and fir logs that he wanted. Solomon gave Hiram about 120,000 bushels of wheat and about 120,000 gallons of pure olive oil every year for his family. And Yahuah made Solomon wise as he had promised. Hiram and Solomon made a covenant between themselves and were at peace with one another. Many people think this was an exorbitant amount and that there's a typing error and that it was only 12,000. I don't care really. Either way, it's a lot of stuff. He's doing a bit of a bartering. You help me and I'll help you. We've got to get this temple built. King Solomon forced 30,000 men of Israel to help in this work. Remember in Moses' time when the tabernacle was all volunteer work. Solomon forced 30,000 men of Israel to help in this work. He chose a man named Adoniram to be in charge of them. Solomon divided the men into 3 groups of 10,000 men in each group. Each group worked 1 month in Lebanon and then went home for 2 months. Solomon also forced 80,000 men to work in the hill country cutting stone. There were also 70,000 men to carry the stones, with 3,300 men to supervise the workers. King Solomon commanded them to cut large, expensive stones for the foundation of the temple. Then Solomon and Hiram's builders and the men from Gebal carved the stones and prepared them and the logs for use in building the temple. The stones were completely finished before they were brought into the temple area, so there was no noise of hammers, axes, or any other iron tools in the temple. Interesting. I'm not going into a lot of all this because I've done about 8 videos on this, so I'll leave the links to them underneath if you want to look at all this. By ordering his people into forced labor, this was interesting, by ordering his people into forced labor, Solomon was behaving like a typical pagan Gentile monarch and not like the righteous shepherd that he was supposed to be. Just like the many horses he'd amassed from Egypt. He was told not to do that. Kings weren't allowed. Yahuah's kings weren't supposed to do that. In many ways, this was a fulfillment of the prophetic warning Samuel gave the people when they demanded a king. Remember when they demanded a king, and Samuel gave them all these warnings. Samuel had told them they would lose their rights and freedoms, and their sons would be enlisted in wars and sent out to be workers, and you wouldn't have a choice about it. If that's what's going to happen if you keep begging for a king. Solomon was utilizing every form of resource and manpower in his new kingdom. So even though the behavior is not necessarily good, Yahuah was using all this to get his temple built. So in the second month of the year, during Solomon's 4th year as king, he began work on the temple. This was 480 years after Israel left Egypt. So nearly 500 years since the Exodus, this temple is built. This is around 690 BC. The temple was 30 meters long, 10 meters wide, 15 meters high. The porch was 10 meters long, 5 meters wide, running along the front of the main part of the temple. Its length was equal to the temple width. Narrow windows were in the temple, smaller on the inside of the wall than on the outside. Solomon built a row of rooms around the main part of the temple, 3 stories high, with the rooms built one above the other. The rooms touched the temple wall, but their beams were not built into that wall. The temple wall became thinner at the top, so the rooms on the upper floors were larger than the ones below them. The rooms on the bottom floor were 2.5 meters wide, 3 meters wide on the middle floor, and 3.5 meters wide on the top floor. There he is. It's all happening. It's coming together. The entrance to these rooms was on the bottom floor at the south side, and inside were stairs that went up to the 2nd floor and from there to the 3rd floor. Solomon finished building the main part of the temple and then covered it inside with cedar boards, then finished the rooms around the temple. Each story was 2.5 meters high, and the cedar beams in these rooms rested on a ledge of the temple wall. Right in the middle of all this construction, Yahuah said to Solomon, "If you obey all my laws and commands, I will do for you what I promised your father David. I will live among the children of Israel in this temple that you are building, and I will never leave the people of Israel." Not because of the temple he's building, if you obey all my laws and commands. There's a sudden interruption in the narrative of the temple construction, and Solomon is given an important message from Yahuah, probably through the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite. This divine oracle carries a meaning that we all need to pay attention to. Yahuah essentially warned Solomon that with all the care and expense and focus that he's lavishing on this temple project, that he needs to remember that trusting him and following his Torah commands is what will bring about the divine promise made to his father David, which is having Yahuah dwell amongst his people Israel and not abandon them. The implication is unmistakable. Yahuah is noticing, we saw this in the last couple of chapters as well, Yahuah is noticing that Solomon was beginning to count more on his industrious works and his merits and the spending of his and his people's wealth in order to impress the nations. Sounding righteous, looking righteous, building a grand structure that Solomon would get all the credit for, requiring thousands of his citizens to sacrifice their personal time, skills, and money for his grand plan. How much of this was about Yahuah and how much was about Solomon's becoming envied and famous the world over? Not saying this pattern wasn't given to David by Yahuah, not saying this wasn't a obedient task, righteous plan. We're looking at Solomon's behavior. Because remember, he's in the beginnings of a downward spiral. The money, the wealth, all the women, wives, concubines, everything is starting to slowly seep into his behavior. Yeah? Because this is the height of Israel's wealth, success, security, peace. He's got no enemies. He can do what he wants, he thinks. You know how the flesh thinks, you know what comes to us. This is where Solomon's at. So Yahuah's not stupid though, he's seeing this. That's why in the middle of all these plans, he comes in there and reminds him, just remember, if you want me to be in this temple and fulfill these promises I gave to your father, obedience, yeah? But even more, after spending all this time and effort, would Solomon now expect that this is what would cause Yahuah to continue David's royal dynasty and favour his nation? I mean, how could Yahuah possibly refuse to do so after Solomon has spent such great energy for his new house? We've all thought like this, and we've all been painfully wrong. How could Yahushua not be in what I'm doing? I've spent so much time and effort and put so much of myself into A, B, C, D, and E. How could Yahushua not? Well, we've all discovered that if you don't do things his way, it don't matter how much time you waste or energy you put into it. It's got to be his way. Anyway, when Solomon finished the stonework on the temple, the stone walls inside the temple were covered with cedar boards from floor to ceiling. Then the stone floor was covered with pine boards. They built an inner room 10 meters long in the back part of the temple called the most set apart place, or the oracle. They covered the walls in this room with cedar boards from floor to ceiling. In front of this room was the main part of the temple, 20 meters long, and they covered the walls in this room with cedar boards, so none of the stones in the walls could be seen. All these flashy stones, not going to see any of them, covered with cedar boards. Then they carved pictures of flowers and gourds into the cedar. Solomon finished the inner room in the back part of the temple, which was for the Ark of the Blood Covenant. There it is there, the inner room. And this room was a gold-covered cube. It's actually a cube, 10 by 10 by 10 meters. Interestingly, the New Jerusalem is also a cube. Remember when we done our studies on the New Jerusalem? It's a cube. Solomon also covered the cedar altar and the inside of the temple with pure gold and wrapped gold chains around it. The inside of the temple was covered with gold, and the altar in front of the most set-apart place was covered with gold also. The workers made 2 statues of olive wood cherubim, these things here, with wings, and put them in the most set-apart place, each 5 meters tall. Both cherubim were the same size and built the same way. Each had 2 wings 5 meters wide, and from the end of one wing to the end of the other wing was 5 meters wide. These were placed in the most set-apart place, with their wings touching each other in the middle of the room, and the other 2 wings touching each side wall. These 2 olive cherubim were also covered with pure gold. The walls around the main room and the inner room were carved with pictures of cherubim, palm trees, and flowers, and the floor of both rooms was covered with pure gold. In case I forget, the cherubim, palm trees, flowers was all alluding back to the Garden of Eden, which was Yahuah's marriage home, where the portal was. And this was to be the most grandest in this era, as far as a physical building goes. This was to be the most grandest of representatives of the Garden of Eden, really. So the workers made up to here. The workers made 2 doors from olive wood and put them at the entrance of the most set apart place. The frame around the doors was made with 5 sides. Then they made 2 doors from olive wood with carved pictures of cherubim, palm trees, and flowers on them. Then they covered them all with gold. There were 2 doors made from pine, and each door had 2 parts that folded together. They carved pictures of cherubim, palm trees, and flowers on those doors also. Then they covered them all with gold. Then they built a wall around the inner yard. Each wall was made from 3 rows of cut stones and 1 row of cedar timbers. They started working on Yahuah's temple in the 2nd month of the year, during Solomon's 4th year as king of Israel, and the temple was finished in the 8th month of the year, in Solomon's 11th year as king, which means, so it took 7 years to build the temple of Yahuah, and it was built exactly as planned. And people have said, when you bring in inflation, countering inflation and everything like that, that it's the most expensive building ever to be made because of all the gold, the silver, the precious stones and gems and wood. We went into all this in our studies, like I said. I'll leave all those links under the video, as well as the animated videos that my sons Micah and Hunter did as well, all about Solomon's temple. Really interesting if you want to go further into this study, if you missed all those. We did them a few months ago. Check out this picture. I'd never seen that before. What a rendition. Amazing. King Solomon also built a palace for himself. Here we go. And it took 13 years to build. So the temple took 7 years, but his palace took 13 years. Twice the amount of time to build his palace. He also built the house called the Forest of Lebanon. What was the Forest of Lebanon? It was called the Forest of Lebanon because of how it looked and how it was constructed. It was a maze of cedar beams and posts, and since the cedars came from Lebanon, no doubt its name was both a euphemism and honorary name that would commemorate Lebanon's contribution to the temple and to the palace. So that's why it's called the Forest of Lebanon. Some people say that it was like Solomon's holiday house up in Lebanon. No, it was just called the Forest of Lebanon. It was in Jerusalem here. It was 50 meters long, 25 meters wide, 15 meters high, and had 4 rows of cedar columns with a cedar capital on each. A capital is the big round thing with flowers and everything on it. It's like the knob on the top of the column. That's what the capital of a column is. There were cedar beams going across the rows of columns, 15 beams for each section of columns, 45 in total. On top of these beams were cedar boards for the ceiling. There were 3 rows of windows across from each other on the side walls and 3 doors at each end. All the door openings and frames were square. Solomon also built the porch of columns, 25 meters long, 15 meters wide, and along the front of the porch was a covering supported by columns. He also built a throne room, the judgment hall. So his throne room, here it is, this is his throne room here, which was the judgment hall, where he sat in right ruling. And this room was covered with cedar from floor to ceiling also. Most of this is actually written in 1st and 2nd, mainly 2nd Chronicles. We're not going to go into Chronicles though. We'll wait till we get to Chronicles to redo all this again. But that's where it actually explains all the tigers and all the things, the gold, everything in much more detail. But for now, we're just going through 1 Kings by this stage, chapter 6 we're in. So this is his throne room we've just seen. And so you can see how grand it is. Look at it all. Look what he did to the whole city. There's the temple up here. And then this is all his Forest of Lebanon's in here. And then his throne room was in here. Look at the space. All the city of Jerusalem here. Behind the judgment hall was a courtyard, and the palace where Solomon lived was built around that courtyard and looked just like the judgment hall. He also built the same kind of palace for his wife, the daughter of Egypt's Pharaoh. I bet he did. That was his first wife, his first joining with a major nation. He had to make sure she was happy. All these buildings were made with expensive blocks of stone, cut to the right size with a saw and then smoothed front and back. These expensive stones went from the foundation all the way up to the top layer of the wall. Even the wall around the yard was made with expensive blocks of stone. The foundations were made with large, expensive stones. Some of the stones were 5 meters long. Some of the stones were 5 meters long. That's bigger than a normal room some side. 5 meters long, and others were 4 meters long. On top of these stones, there were other expensive stones and cedar beams. There were walls around the palace yard and around the yard and porch of Yahuah's temple. The walls were built with 3 rows of stone and 1 row of cedar timbers. So you can see he's really fortifying his kingdom, isn't he? And this isn't all of Jerusalem. This is mainly the city of David, this area here, Zion. Jerusalem was much wider. It was like the suburb, the city. King Solomon sent for a man named Hiram, who lived in Tyre, and brought him to Jerusalem. Hiram's mother was a Yisraelite from the tribe of Naphtali, and his dead father was from Tyre. Hiram made things from bronze. Here we go. He made things from bronze and was a very skilled and experienced builder. So King Solomon asked him to come, and Hiram accepted. King Solomon put him in charge of all the bronze work. That would have been a job. And Hiram did all the work he was given to do. What did he do? Hiram made 2 bronze columns for the porch. Here they are here. This is a capital. This thing here, that's what they call a capital, a round bit. He made 2 bronze columns for the porch, which is the front of the temple. Each column was 9 meters tall, 6 meters around. The columns were hollow and their metal walls were 3 inches thick. He also made 2 bronze capitals that were 2.5 meters tall. So that's 2.5 meters tall there, just that bit. He put these capitals on top of the columns. He made 2 nests of chains to cover the capitals. The chains, see the chains that are going around the circle bit, the crisscross bit there? That's the chains. Then he made 2 rows of bronze pomegranates and put them on the nets of each column to cover the capitals at the top of the columns. Here. The capitals on the top of the columns were shaped like flowers. There we go. Top of the flowers there. They were shaped like flowers above the bowl-shaped net. There were 200 pomegranates in rows all around the capitals. Hiram put these 2 bronze columns at the porch of the temple. One column named Yakin was on the south side of the entrance and the other called Boaz on the north side. They put the flower-shaped capitals on top of the columns, and the work on the 2 columns was finished. Yakin means he shall establish, Yahuah shall establish. And Boaz, in him is strength. Then Hiram melted bronze and poured it into a huge mold to make a tank, which was called the sea. The tank was around 15 meters around, 5 meters across, and 2.5 meters deep. 15 meters around. That's huge. There was a rim around the outer edge of the tank, and under this rim there were 2 rows of bronze gourds all around the tank. The bronze gourds were made in one piece as part of the tank. The tank rested on the backs of 12 bronze bulls, and all 12 of the bulls were looking out, away from the tank. 3 were looking north, 3 east, 3 south, and 3 west. The sides of the tank were 3 inches thick. 3 inches thick. The rim around the tank was like the rim of a cup, or like the petals on a flower, and the tank held around 11,000 gallons of water. That's this thing here, called the molten sea, or in many cases it was just called the sea. The sea. And as we saw in our last episode of Revelation, this sea was shadowing the sea of glass like crystal in the heavenly temple, heavenly city. Then he made 10 bronze carts. Well, here it is here. The brazen lava, molten sea, what we're talking about here, nicknamed the sea, was the blueprint and shadow for the heavenly sea of glass like crystal. The divine city. This was interesting understanding this. Living water, because this thing had to be filled with living water. And that wasn't just some weird people like the Catholics do. It's holy water. They've blessed it. No, nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with it. Living water just meant running water. Yeah, it was water that was running, so it was fresh. It wasn't still and stagnant. And this thing had pipes going into it, so it was actually running. And they used to fill up the little trolleys with a mouth of one of the bulls. But this thing was flowing. There was water. Didn't know they were so advanced in plumbing, but they had water running into this all the time. So it was living water for cleansing the priests. And it was simply water that was fresh and moving. In Ezekiel's millennial temple, this is interesting, in Ezekiel's millennial temple, the New Jerusalem made up of living stones, there is no molten sea. No molten sea. Now, many people think Ezekiel's millennial temple, that prophecy, is going to be some new temple that gets built in the millennial kingdom, which is ridiculous because Yahuah said, I'm never going back to man-made structures again. So you got your understanding a bit skewed there. What is it? It's a new temple made of living stones. It's being formed right now in us. And in it, there is no molten sea. This thing's not in it. And also in Revelation 21 we read, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had passed away, all frackled up, and the sea was no more. This isn't speaking about the oceans, but about the sea. They used to call this thing the sea. The molten sea for priestly cleansing, not there. The old heaven and old earth had passed away. The sea was no more. Don't need it. For in the new city there will be no need of a cleansing lava. All priestly services within our human bodies are done. No more cleansing required. No more water and washing and immersions and all sorts of things. Washing by the water of the word, not needed anymore. It's done. So this sea is not needed in the new city, which makes sense. There's no need of any sun or moon either. There's not even a need of a temple. So it all flows, see? Don't need the sea, don't need sun or moon for light, don't need a temple either. Why? Because Yahushua's complete, radiant, magnificent, sustains everything. He is everything. Got it? I just thought we'd add that in here because it's talking about this molten sea, the sea. And this is the fulfillment of the sea, the fact that it cleanses us and we get our act together, we overcome, we are ready for the bride, ready to be the bride, the bridal wedding feast. We're ready for that. And then it's no longer needed. The new city has none of that in it. Each cart, what cart? This cart here. See, there's 10 of them, 5 on this side, and there were 5 along that side as well. There's a little one peeking out there. There are 10 all up. Each of these carts was 2 by 2 by 2 and made with square panels set in frames with bronze bulls, lions and cherubim on them. There were designs of flowers hammered into the bronze above and below the bulls and lions also. Each cart had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles, and at the corners there were bronze supports for a large bowl, which had designs of flowers hammered into the bronze. So it's pretty accurate, this picture here, what he's explaining. And it's 2 meters square. 2 meters, that's huge. There was a frame around the top with an opening for the bowl, 1/2 meter tall, 1.5 meters in diameter. There were designs carved into the bronze on the frame, which was square, not round. See, this bit's square. There were 4 wheels under the frame, which were 1.5 meters in diameter. The axles between the wheels were made as one piece with the cart, and the wheels were like chariot wheels. Yep. The sides of the cart and the frames had images of cherubim, lions, and palm trees carved into the bronze, carved all over the cart, wherever there was room. And there were flowers carved on the frame around the cart also. He doesn't want them to forget about the Garden of Eden, does he? About the cherubim, all that. Hiram made 10 carts, and they were all the same, each made from bronze, melted and poured into a mold. So they were all the same. Hiram also made 10 bowls, one for each of the carts. Each bowl was 2 meters across and could hold about 230 gallons. He put 5 carts on the south side of the temple and 5 carts on the north side. He also put the large tank in the southeast corner of the temple. Hiram also made pots, small shovels, and small bowls. So you can see what's going on here. Look at the area. Hiram made everything King Solomon wanted, all from polished bronze. And Solomon never weighed the bronze that was used to make these things. There was way too much to weigh. So the total weight of all the bronze was never known. The king ordered these things to be made near the Jordan River between Sukkoth and Zarethan. They made them by melting the bronze and pouring it into molds in the ground. Solomon also commanded that the golden altar, the golden table that held the showbread, the lampstands of pure gold, the gold flowers, lamps, tongs, pure gold bowls, lamp snuffers, small bowls, pans, dishes for carrying coals, the gold hinges for the doors to the inner rooms, to the most set-apart place, and for the doors to the main room of the temple, all of them were to be made from pure gold for the temple. So King Solomon finished all the work he wanted to do for Yahuwah's temple. Then he took everything his father David had prepared for this special purpose and put them in the temple. He put the silver and gold in the special storage rooms in Yahuah's temple also. So, you can see, it's pretty impressive. They've never been able to construct anything quite this impressive ever since. So just to make it, what does it all mean? The whole purpose of the temple. We know after all our many studies now that Yahushua came and said, we are the temple. This whole portal that was going on in the garden, a connection between heaven and earth, which was severed through mankind's, Adam and Eve's sin, severed. So these two circles were separated. And then it happened. Burning bush, Yahuah appeared. He appeared in the tabernacle. He appeared in the temple, his presence. Then he appeared as a man, and he died. His flesh was rent, his blood was shed, and then he appeared in all his believers, in their hearts, and a divine heart operation occurs. An incorruptible seed is sown, and we are waiting for the time when it will all come together. We will all come together in this new city. So this here is the history of the portal. Through Scripture, we see the progressive revelation of the divine temple that originally began in heaven. Adam and Eve had open heavens, and in time it became a physical object built by men's hands, a shadow. Beginning with altars, then Moses' tabernacle, David's tent, Solomon's temple. Then Yahushua came in the flesh as the living temple, declaring that you are now the temple. And finally, at the time of a new heaven and new earth, this revelation comes full circle, returning to the total spiritual substance in which Yahushua himself is that completed temple, in a new city made up of his living bridal stones, who have also become individual temples for his portal and have used the power sown within them to become perfected and marriage ready. So the ultimate fulfillment and revelation of who Yahushua is and who this temple is it's him. And because we will be consummated, joined to him and part of him, we become that temple too. His dwelling place is the more accurate Hebrew understanding of it, not temple. It's actually a dwelling place, his house, where he is. Yeah. So Yahushua first came along as the temple man, and now we are all temple men and women, living dwellings of the divine portal. This ark that was once in the tabernacle and temple is now on our heart, and we are kings and priests, just like Yahushua was, kings and priests. His assembly is empowered to be kings and priests to the nations, and we've been looking lately at what the priests are actually to do in relation to the pattern and shadow of the tabernacle or temple. In the temple, Yahuah used actual materials to build his house. Didn't he? What? How expensive and lavish. He used actual materials to build his house, but today he uses people to build his new blood covenant temple. To become washed clean, divinely operated on, and have the seed of immortality sown within them to transform their behavior, making them qualify for his new living dwelling. Well, this is an offer available to anyone from any kindred, tongue, tribe, and nation, so that they may surrender, die to their flesh, and let Yahushua shine through them as priests and temples, just as he did. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole purpose. That's why we're learning about this tabernacle now. Tabernacle and now temple. And Yahushua did all this. Yahushua connected the dimensions again with his own blood. It's all about his blood, that powerful antidote. Antidote for the snake bite, antidote for the condition of sin, that corruptible seed within us that seeks to kill us. And in our meeting the other night, we looked at the statistics of suicide and such a high percentage in each nation is. And so the devil's going for it. If he can get people to kill themselves, that saves time for him, doesn't it? He wants the world to burn because he knows what's going to happen to him. And he's taking as many people to destruction with him as he can. So ever since Yahushua died, of course, he sent his spirit on the day of Pentecost. See the little fires on top of everyone's heads? Tongues of fire, foreign languages that they had not learned. Speaking and taking the languages to the world. No light, no Yahushua, no deliverance, no eternal life. If you don't have the name of Yahushua, you don't have deliverance. You don't have eternal life. Let's call it a spade. You can argue with it as much as you like. Don't have it. You're not having this experience. You don't have a living portal, interdimensional portal in your heart. Knocking at the door. Speaks about that in Revelation. Solomon's temple was covered in pure gold and would cost over $150 billion today to build. But Yahushua thinks you are more valuable. You are a more valuable place to dwell in. So, as we've been saying, do you realize you are a king and a priest? Do you realize you are royalty? You are this living dwelling. Look at the effort Solomon went into. Whatever his motivations were, part of them were to honor Yahuah and follow in the footsteps of his father David, who wasn't allowed to. He certainly took it as far to the line that he could, though, as far as preparing it. He just wasn't allowed to physically construct it. Solomon did. Look at the effort. Look at the detail that Yahuah gave David. And we can see all the shadows, and that's what the other studies are about, all the shadows. So that's how Yahushua feels about you, brothers and sisters. It's all about love. He does all this because he wants to dwell in us and speak to us, spend time with us, move through us, have us become his light, his voice, his priests on this earth, to do tasks, to do priestly duties. So we're going to see this temple get established next week, not inaugurated, not ordained, I've forgotten the word. The temple is, lost the word. But next week we're going to see the fire, the smoke come into the temple, yeah? And it's very exciting. So love you guys, stay strong.
Check it out. Check it out. Ain't it funkin' now? Ain't it funkin' now? Ain't it funkin' now? Ain't it funkin' now? Check it out.
with it, can't think, quit it, stomp on a stoop when I hear funk blue, playing pop pipe, follow her to shoot, baby, just sing about the groove.
Sing it.
The groove is in the heart. The groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart.
Blow them horns along.
Groove is in the heart.
Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the Groove is in the
Come on, y'all are crazy, man.